Well, if you hang around long enough, sooner or later, everything's going to happen. And if you hang around long enough, you might see a piece of actual reporting. And that's what I want to use to lead this story off with today. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And this is your right angle on the powers of the hive mind. Here's the accidental piece of reporting. ABC News reports that in an exclusive, headline says, classified study found COVID-19 could have originated in Chinese lab. Now, guys, I don't want to talk about where COVID-19 could have originated. We've talked about that a lot before. But what I do want to talk about is this. What we've seen, especially since, coincidentally enough, Inauguration Day, is we have seen again and again and again and again and again all of these crackpot, fanatical, lunatic, paranoid conspiracy theories that so many people believed in the early days of the pandemic and in the aftermath of the election, they're turning out to be true. Every single week, it seems that we're hearing from some state or another. Actually, come to think of it, yes, there were some significant electoral irregularities, and hydroxychloroquine does actually work, and so on and so on and so on. And the reason I wanted to talk about this was this study is based basically on a classified report that the military did. But I had a pretty convincing evidence that this virus came out of the Wuhan virology lab within a week of the lockdown, which would be well over a year before this article came out. That's what I want to talk about today, guys, is the idea that the internet, despite the censorship, and I do want to talk about the censorship too, is in fact a machine that is capable of assembling tremendous expert systems and delivering verdicts based on real data well in advance of these slow boats that are running the news media. Steve, so many of the things that we were told were just completely insane, like hydroxychloroquine being effective against COVID-19 and maybe the mask not working out as well as people had said, or, election irregularities, all of it. It turned out to be true. But the thing that's interesting to me is that the people who, at least for people like me, the reason that I felt these things were true before they've been confirmed by the news media was because for some of us, data is more important than theory.
Yeah, it's called science. The thing is, follow the science, believe the science, trust the science. None of that science. The science is nothing more than a process to do our best to eliminate human bias and human error along the way of discovering essential truths about the way the world works. That's all it is. That's why you have things like peer review. And that's why when you have a theory and the data contradicts the theory, you don't change the data. You got to change your theory, or you don't bury the data. You've got to change your theory. Anything else is not science. It's partisanship. It's propaganda. What drew me to the blogosphere, and I started Vodka Pundit, I believe, January 10, 2002. So I've been doing this for almost 20 years, if you can believe that. What drew me to it was this level playing field we had.
Yeah, exactly.
Maureen Dowd could
all
write. All
three of us.
Exactly. Maureen Dowd could write a stupid piece for the New York Times, and I could get in front of my computer, in my basement, in my pajamas, and write a really funny Fisking style rebuttal to a Maureen Dowd column and get more internet chatter and maybe even more internet traffic than Maureen Dowd did at the New York Times, just by getting it out there and letting this level playing field do its thing. It was the secret to the blog, the success of the early blogosphere, was the hyperlink. Or as Ken Lane, another early blogger, and I was so sorry we lost him to Bush derangement syndrome, but as Ken Lane said at the time, we can fact check your ass. And that was exactly what early bloggers did. We were in the business of fact checking the major news networks, and it was so American. It was so liberating. It was just the most American thing digitized. I adored those early days. And the genius of the hyperlink was not only could you direct readers to the source material to show them that this is what you're really talking about, that it's out there, but other people would hyperlink back to you. And that's how anybody could bubble up, even if only for a day or two, to compete with the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times or the Chicago Tribune. The problem is we don't have a level playing field anymore. the debate is essentially over because Facebook controls the traffic, Twitter controls the conversation, and both are dominated by progressives who aren't interested in debate, who won't let you link to things that they don't approve of, that haven't been fact-checked by PolitiFact. And, a quick word on PolitiFact. They are the worst hacks in existence because they are the hacks who claim to be exposing other hacks when in fact all they do is hack.
I did a segment on PolitiFact. It's a guy in an apartment in Denmark and another guy who used to work was a producer at CNN. That's it.
Yeah, and they and Facebook determine what you can read and what you can share. So we don't have a level playing field. We have this silo that everything has to filter through. And you mentioned the Firefly reference, can't stop the signal. Well, they can't stop the signal. We can still get stuff out there, but it takes longer and the eventual audience is smaller than it could be or should be. And as a result of this slowed down signal, kind of like Israel is slowed down signal, they get to do what they want. We got the shutdowns despite the evidence. We let communist China off the hook despite the evidence. We didn't investigate the election until after Biden was sworn in despite the evidence, all because of this silo that is essentially controlled by a very few number of companies and their left-wing enablers in the media.
I believe I was wrong about PolitiFact, by the way. I think I was referring to another one of these fact-check agencies that YouTube would send us to. Scott, you back a lifetime ago, you had a little bit of training in journalism school, and watching these things happen, especially during the last year, the thing that struck me the most is somebody makes a claim. And for me, again, this is well over a year ago, where somebody makes a claim and says, "Listen, I'm a virologist, and I understand DNA, and I've taken a look at the DNA profile of the virus has been released, and I am seeing there with my own eyes segments that look like they've been cut and pasted from other viruses." And the news media instantly says this is absolutely insane, xenophobic, Asian-hating, smear job, paranoid lunacy, conspiracy theory. But the one thing that they didn't do was send in a reporter to investigate whether this might be true or not. And this is what I've seen the news media do for the last year again and again and again and again and again, is make a proclamation immediately, but never, ever, ever go out and actually investigate if the people who are making these so-called outrageous claims have any evidence. And if they do, writing about it. What happened?
As a student of journalism at the time when I was working on a journalist degree,
back when it was
and
journalism.
then afterwards when I was a newspaper reporter, I was always looking for the story that nobody else knew about. So I was constantly have my antenna up. I mean, I'd go to the school board meetings because it was like a contractual obligation, but I didn't expect any news to happen at a school board meeting. My beat was public schools in the area, so I covered like 4 or 5 different school districts. I didn't expect any real stories to happen there. No, the real story happened when I got a phone call from a guy I'd never heard of before who worked in the cafeteria at one of the schools and said he had noticed lately that the school was starting to buy some shady meat products. I forget exactly what the nature of it was because it was many years ago today.
I went to that school.
So I actually followed up with a phone call to the school district, who of course didn't know much about it or tried to portray it that they were actually using a lower fat, a leaner meat product,
Mystery meat.
which of course means it doesn't taste good. And then I actually went to the meat supplier. I showed up at his property for the meat supplier to ask him about what he was selling to the school district, and he threatened to punch me if I didn't get off his property. So that is what reporters do. Like, reporters go to places. I'm not saying I was the world's greatest reporter. That was like a brief highlight. That's my entire highlight
but you
reel.
were a reporter.
But I was interested. And I wanted to see what was going on. And if you just watch what appears to be happening and don't, as you suggest, look at the data. I'm reading this SpaceX book right now called Liftoff. And one of the fascinating things is during the first 2 launches of the Falcon rocket, the one blew up and the other did a lot better. But anyway, the guy who was like in charge of the Merlin engine on this Falcon rocket, while a lot of people were looking at the video or watching the rocket ascend, he never looked at it at all. He was staring at his computer screen and watching the data. And he knew before the first one went bad that it was going to go bad. And he knew when the second one was going to go bad as well, because he could see the data and he was able to process that in real time. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of people who are trained to look at data or who are even interested in looking at data. So data sounds boring. In fact, I think they need a new word for it. Like maybe we could just call data porn and more people would want to look at it. So
certainly change Google's results.
Yeah. Anyway, so, you have to find a way to both watch the rocket and watch your computer screen at the same time when you see what's going on in public. We're bored by it. We don't care about it. And the other thing is, and the final thing here, when you have useful data about something, the last thing you want to do is start pushing that through a political channel. Start handing that over to the Fox News people or whatever other, blogger or website is pushing a political agenda on either side of the aisle for that matter. If you've got interesting data that needs further exploration, you need to get that in the hands of somebody who knows how to analyze data and who doesn't have a political agenda. And nobody seems to know how to do that, because the moment a political person, I believe about as much of what politicians say about science as I do about what actors say about politics. I just don't believe either one of them. So I'm not going to read that and go, oh, well, so-and-so says this new potion works to cure COVID. I'm like, says who? This guy? I'm not going to believe that. Where's the data? Show me the data. And I suggest that most people aren't interested in seeing the data. They're more interested in advancing the virus of their political view than they are in actually killing a virus of a biological nature.
When we were discussing this on our backstage show, I said I knew that this story about the lab had real credible basis to it a year ago, and Scott said, "Yeah, well, you're not like other people," and to one degree that's true, but it's only because I've learned how to do something. It's an acquired skill. There's nothing innate about it. It's just something I learned how to do, and I learned how to do it in debate class in high school. One thing I learned in debate, the single thing I learned in debate, was simply this: that I could produce 50 evidence cards saying that the death penalty deters murder, and I could produce another 50 evidence cards saying that it didn't. And the ability to be able to understand which one of these has a better bearing on truth is something you can learn how to do. The internet tells me that the moon landing didn't happen, and people on the internet tell me that this virus probably came out of the Wuhan virology lab. Why is it that I don't believe the first one, but I do believe the second? Well, the quality of the evidence is so much better for the second one. Occam's razor is working much more strongly in both cases, telling me don't believe the first one. I mean, do believe the lab, don't believe the fake moon landing thing. These are techniques that you can learn how to do, and we better learn how to do them. Because as Steve pointed out, as we made the critical, unbelievable, catastrophic error of deciding that we were going to put information on other people's private property, once we made that catastrophic mistake, now the filters are in place. And now is the time more than ever that we need to understand how to do this. It's not a difficult thing to learn how to do, by the way. You don't have to have these advanced degrees. You just have to learn how to look at things like, what is this guy's background? So many times you'll see an expert will say something along the lines of, the climate warming, the global warming thing is just out of control, and I'm a PhD. Okay, what's your PhD in? It's in it's in literature. Oh, now you've taught me two things. You've taught me, number one, that you're not an expert in the area that you claim to be, but you've taught me something much more important, and that is that you have posed as an expert. By saying I'm a PhD, you see, I'm smarter than you are, and you've just simply shown me that you are not a credible source of evidence or data. And all of this stuff is true. And to bring it to just a final concrete example of the power of the internet still, despite all the censorship, we have to go back to the 2004 election and the George Bush, the allegations that 60 Minutes made that George Bush was AWOL from the Texas Air National Guard, and they had a document to prove it. For those of you who haven't heard the story before, it's very brief. 60 Minutes said that George Bush was basically AWOL, that he used political power to cover up the fact that he just goofed off. And they provided a document, a memo that said the 168th Texas Air National Guard, and so on and so on and so on. Here's the hot incriminating evidence. And then 60 Minutes made the mistake of putting that on the internet. Well, once it was on the internet, people could look at it. They could examine the data, didn't have to listen to the theory or the story. Here's the evidence. And almost immediately, a guy on the Free Republic, guy named Buckhead, as I recall, said, hey, wait a minute. This was written in 1968, according to 60 Minutes. Then why is it that it says 168th with the uppercase th, which is what word processors do to indicate the 168th? If you don't have a word processor, it's 168th. It doesn't do that magical little reduction there. And all of a sudden, people said, well, he's absolutely right. And so then 60 Minutes starts backpedaling. Well, they don't know. Charles Johnson, back when he was still sane, then basically took the contents of this letter, put it into Microsoft Word with the default settings, didn't change a thing, printed it out on a printer, overlaid it with the document that CBS News was claiming was real, did a GIF animation flashing back and forth, and it's clearly just a weathered copy. And when 60 Minutes comes back and says, well, there were, in fact, computers that were capable of doing this back in those days, you find out, yes, they're $8,000 graphic designer computers, which seems unlikely in a Quonset hut in the Texas Air National Guard for a guy to write a memo of essentially no importance. And this is how you can weigh data and determine whether or not something is true. The miracle of the internet for me, the button on top of all of it was when 60 Minutes said, no, it's possible to do that with the IBM Selectric. You can remove the ball and then put in the ball and type in the TH and then move it out again when you're typing a memo. That's all what you do when you're in the military. But he said, I can do this with the IBM Selectric. And somebody stepped forward and said, no, actually you can't. And the question was, well, who are you to say? And the guy said, well, I'm the engineer who designed the IBM Selectric. I built it. This is the power of the information net. And to be finding out again and again and again and again and again, the things that my ability to weigh data told me were probably true, now being admitted were true, is telling me that this is something we should be teaching to ourselves and to other people who care about the truth, because as both Steve and Scott have said, there is a tendency to believe the expert, and most people don't want to follow the science. They want to follow the scientist. And that is a grave and potentially fatal error for a free country. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. This show is made possible by the members of BillWhittle.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.